Hey, in today's episode, we once again kind of visit this topic of the Eucharist and Jesus' touchability, whether, on the hand or on the tongue, always seems to be this controversy in the church. But we dive into these ideas of intimacy, reverence, worthiness, all of these things that a lot of Catholics are wrestling with, and also talk about the difference of how men and women approach these matters differently. So I got a lot out of this episode, and I hope you do too. Well, I mean, are we gonna dive into all this stuff?
Well, what's on your mind this morning?
Let's not shift the format.
Okay, jeez. All right. Well,
go ahead. You drive.
Well, I mean, it's your story that you were going to tell, so maybe we should start there. But I mean, I'll tee it up by just saying that the question is, are we allowed to, touch Jesus? Are we allowed to, relate to Jesus in a way that's intimate and affectionate? And what does that mean in terms of reverence? What does it mean to be reverent towards, especially the Eucharist, the Eucharistic presence of our Lord, or how we receive our Lord in Holy Communion? And there's a reason why we're talking about this, because you had a conversation with somebody.
That was a great setup.
I should probably keep it anonymous, too.
Oh, I shouldn't use names, addresses.
You don't want to embarrass anybody. But it's a good story, because I've encountered the same thing, and it doesn't add up.
No, it's a great story, but I just want to go back to how you set that whole thing up. That kind of cracks me up. That it's almost like the assumption is I got to remind this guy to have some type of boundaries and parameters around how he tells the story, because there's a chance that he might just publicly embarrass somebody else.
Well, you've been known to do that on occasion.
Only whenever necessary. I'm able to discern those things.
Sometimes you're just so chill about things.
Yeah.
Not everybody feels the same.
Yeah.
Chill.
Okay.
Kind of sense of cool.
Let me jump into it. I was recently in a conversation with a group of people, and we talked about this on a podcast episode, but it's inevitably, especially with Catholics, the conversations veer into these topics that people have a lot of confusion or uncertainty about, even though they may have a lot of internal conviction about it. They're not totally sure, what are other people thinking, and what's the crowd that I'm in, so that I don't step on toes. But anyway, the conversation inevitably led to what are your thoughts on receiving communion on the hand versus on the tongue? And it's a great conversation. I do oftentimes do a little internal eye roll, because I don't want us as Catholics, Christians, to be caught up in these kinds of things, So my short answer, honestly, there was well, what does the church say? If the church says it's okay to receive either way, then either way is fine. Why do we have to have this personal debate about these things? But anyway, the one person said something that I found super interesting. I was really intrigued, and I wanted to jump in and dig into what she had said, but I was like, this isn't the place or time. But she said that she receives kneeling, and she also wears a veil during Mass, and it's because she wears the veil because she sees herself as the bride of Christ, which I'm like, that's okay, fine. That's really beautiful that you have that image of yourself like that. But then she said, I receive on the tongue because I don't feel worthy to have my hands touch Jesus. And my immediate thought was, you probably shouldn't be married. if like if you're somebody's bride but you don't feel worthy of touching the bridegroom, like your spouse, there's something that I so badly wanted to ask a million questions about, like that I couldn't wrap my brain around that mindset of, see, like having one vision that seems very contradictory to the other thing,
Yeah.
and but anyway, it brought up to me this question of, like, approachability, like, because I do have some definite opinions about God's approachability. And anyway, so that we can kind of kick it off with
Yeah.
that story.
Yeah. No, there's just like so much there. And I mean, I had a similar reaction. How do you reconcile statements like that? And I, immediately my mind went to the Gospels when you first told the story. Not right here, but like
Yeah,
a couple days ago.
mm-hmm.
And I was, and I was thinking about, so often we embrace things that Jesus directly opposes and contradicts. And one of the things that really strikes me, and I, I do a lot of teaching, from the Gospels, and one of the things that's always struck me is that the apostles write into the Gospels, or have written into the Gospels, all the many ways that they didn't get it.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't scrub it. Like, they didn't edit those things out and present themselves as all perfect and all put together. They wrote all the different ways that they didn't get it. Like, they didn't get Jesus. They thought one way, and he constantly is correcting them and even reprimanding them. And so one of these examples is when people are trying to get in close to Jesus and press in on him and touch him, and they get all weird about it, and they try to protect him and push people back. Like, think of the children.
Yeah.
And what does Jesus say? He says, let the children come to me. And he touched the children. And then there's the woman with the hemorrhage who is ritually unclean. And all of the guardians of purity are out there telling, saying, she shouldn't be here even, and she shouldn't be pushing through a crowd to go touch a rabbi in public. Again, he pushes back on the disciples. So those are just a couple of examples that I think of. And so I think sometimes we have these ideas that in order to be reverent and holy and to respect Jesus' divinity, we have to stand at a distance, and we have to sort of extract ourselves from having real human connectivity with him, because somehow that's sacrilegious, or it's irreverent, to our Lord. And yet in the Gospels, Jesus, he models and he says just exactly the opposite of that. And again, it does raise a question for me. It's like, okay, well then what does it mean for me to be reverent?
Yeah.
Because I want to honor Jesus in his divinity, but what does that look like? So I think that story just cuts right to the heart of this question.
Yeah, a couple things, humility and reverence are kind of, as you're talking, the things that I wrote down. Like I feel like in a lot of people's minds, it's sort of, it's a humility that they're trying to convey, like less of me, more of you, kind of a thing. And this idea of reverence, I'm really curious, because I don't, I know a lot of the Gospels and where Jesus talks about about his approachability, like all the things you mentioned. What are some of the examples in the Gospels where Jesus does touch on this idea of reverence, or does he? Like, does he ever really talk about that? Does he talk about how people should approach him with this, like, reverence? I Because it seems like it's so focused on kind of the incarnational sort of aspect of, like, being able to touch him touching people. Does he really?
Well, I feel like you're putting me on the spot, and I'm trying to think
I am. I'm
of
sorry.
verses, but what I think we do see, I don't think he addresses the question of reverence directly. He does talk about, for example, following, the Mosaic law in the ceremonial precepts, but he also has a lot of critique about the kind of attention to the outward with negligence towards the interior. Like, where's your heart? And Scripture's filled with these kind of, people, they honor me with their lips, or you do all your sacrifices, but your hearts are far from me. And then what Jesus models in relationship to his Father, his relationship with the Father, and then what he talks about in terms of his dispositions. He's meek, he's humble, and the thing above all is he's trusting of the Father. And so he teaches us to be trusting of him, and all the people that he commands for pressing through and kind of breaking with the conventions of purity and reverence, you could say, are people that have deep faith, and they trust him. So I think of the sinful woman who's washes his feet with her hair, anoints his feet with oil, and so on. You would say, well, she's groveling, but Jesus says of her, she loved much. So it was a sign of affection. I mean, that's how he frames it. She showed him tremendous affection. So it's not a groveling as much as it is a kind of attentiveness to the bridegroom and a desire to in humility and meekness and littleness of spirit, to be close and intimate. There's a kind of gentleness about it. And I think that that's what the Lord wants. And I think that, like going back to the story, the desire to see oneself as the spouse or as the bride, that's a very endearing, kind of affectionate, sort of intimate image of oneself. But back to your point, but to say, well, I can't touch, is like, okay, now you are casting yourself in the role of one who is in the midst or presence of someone with great power, who one should feel tremendous shame and groveling in the presence of. And I just don't see how Jesus ever presents himself as unapproachable in that way. Now, I'm not saying that this individual thinks of Holy Communion, but if in that way, but if, I was thinking about this, like, okay, so let's compare the hands to the mouth in this regard of touching.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, mouth to mouth is way more intimate than hand to hand. So the fact that you're receiving Holy Communion on the tongue, and by the way, for the sake of our audience, you do receive communion on the tongue. So you're not approaching this from the argument of, oh, you should receive on the hand.
Right.
This idea that, okay, so you can think about it in terms of intimacy and the exchange of bodily contact. The mouth is a way more intimate place.
Sure, yeah.
So receiving on the tongue, if you were to say, well, I want to be close and intimate with the Lord. I want to kiss him with the kiss of the mouth, which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
an expression from the Song of Songs. That would be a way more appropriate way to describe what one is doing by receiving on the tongue. But oftentimes that's not how people frame it. People frame
Right.
it in these terms of I'm unworthy, I don't
Yeah, my
deserve to
hands
be touched.
aren't
Yeah.
clean enough in some sense to
Right. But then think about it from the standpoint of sinning. I'm sure that I sin with my mouth and my tongue way worse than I do with my hands. I mean, the last time I checked, I haven't like hit anybody or taken a gun or a dagger and, killed somebody
A
with my
dagger.
hands. But I have used my tongue in a way that's been very hurtful and very harmful. So you say, well, is my mouth more worthy to receive the Lord in terms of sin? It's like, well, no. So my point is that the logic of the way these things are often framed and described are inconsistent because the root of the matter is the heart. Like, what is my interior disposition?
Yeah.
And do I proceed in receiving the Lord from the right interior disposition? And then what my body does is probably going to fall in line with where my heart is. And that's going to look different for different people because some people, going back to the issue of like actual sexual intimacy, some people are much more hands-on and more touchy-feely, and other people are much less so and more, their bubble is different. And so how they receive Holy Communion is probably going to be very much a reflection of their sense of bodily space and intimacy in other respects.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Those are just a couple of initial thoughts that I
just
have
think
about all that.
I think the imagery of that Jesus used bread, right, as the way to for the Eucharist. Like I've not seen people at a dinner having this vision of people at a dinner table, like the basket of rolls comes around and they're holding the outside of the basket and then they dip their head down into it and like bring up a roll, because you know what I mean? Like
use your
bread
hands.
is meant to be
held. Yeah.
ripped, like all that stuff. It's just so strange to me how and I'm sure that's probably, it's my guess, is that's probably how it was early in the church. Like it was probably very get in amongst it, like dig in kind of experience. And just how things have evolved is fascinating to me, that somewhere along the way we lost that, for who knows what reasons, whether it was just efficiency of like, okay, we can't keep doing this, like there's too many people.
Well, actually, I think the reason is because I think as the emphasis on Jesus' divinity grew and on his real presence in the Eucharist grew, I think certain practices, both in terms of how the priest celebrated and in terms of how the people participated, evolved and developed into these different forms of what would seem like fitting and appropriate expressions of piety and reverence towards the presence of the divine. But I think the thing that we miss in that is like, okay, let's go back to the incarnation. The divine chose to assume a human nature and take on all the realities of that. And then he remains with us in the presence of, he transforms bread and wine, in order to be digested, like to enter into us in this consummatory way. It's very intimate.
Yeah.
It's very hands-on. It's very touching and feeling. And so to be standoffish doesn't seem like the fitting way to receive the way he's presented himself to us. And I think we forget that. Now, again, I have to have the right interior disposition. I could be like, it's like, if I'm making love to my wife and my mind is a million miles away and I'm not immediately absorbed and entering into all of the delicacies and intricacies of that experience, And I'm just like, well, I'm thinking about the Steelers game, or, I'm thinking about what the agenda for our team meeting is going to be tomorrow. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's just, I'm totally not present.
Sure. Yeah.
He's present to me
Right.
in this profound way. And, I'm at Mass thinking about whatever.
Yeah.
Like, that's the problem.
Yeah.
And I suppose certain bodily gestures can help me be more present and more attentive. But we can be very reductionistic in thinking that the main thing is about how I hold my hands, or how I present myself and approach the reception of Holy Communion.
Yeah. With that said, as a dad of 8, and having a 20-year time frame of always having babies or young children at church, I'm going to say it is nearly impossible for a parent to be like very attentive to, or not having your mind pulled in a million different ways, to have this uber, holy and pious kind of like experience of the Mass. Like, oftentimes you just have to, as a parent, you have to have the mindset of like, exactly what you said. Jesus is here. He's present to me. That's why I'm here. Like, that's what I need the most. Like, as much as I would love to always have this transcendental experience of the Mass, like, it just doesn't work like that. And that goes back to this earlier concept I have of like, I feel like sometimes and we've talked about this a lot, we're not comfortable with our limitations. We're not comfortable with just admitting that we have limitations, and trusting in the grace and the love and the mercy of God to fill in those gaps of our limitations. You know what I'm saying?
Well, right. But I also, this touches on the fact that when we've said this so many times on this podcast, but when we frame our relationship with God in terms of a performative framework, you just end up in the wrong headspace. We distort and pervert the reality of what is supposed to be there. We have to first and foremost think of it in relational terms. And it's funny that you went to describing the experience of fatherhood with your children to your availability to be present to the Lord at Mass. And what I was thinking as I was listening to you was, I was sitting there going, how does a father create a kind of boundary around himself with children? I mean, they just climb all over you.
Oh my gosh!
And they want to do that, and you want them to do that.
Yeah.
Go back to the old days when maybe a father in his authority and sternness was unapproachable. Children are to be seen, but never heard. And they are supposed to call you sir or mom, ma'am, and they have to be very formal and very. It's like, was that better? I mean, was it better that we framed the parent-child relationship in terms of a kind of authoritarianism or a kind of like power differential, or is it better that we understand this relationship in terms of affection? When I came home from school, or I should say, when my dad got home from work, I would jump. He would always cross his legs like I'm doing right now and read the paper, and I would like squeeze up in between his legs and he would tighten them up to try to we'd play this game, and he would
try to choke
me.
you out.
Yeah, right.
No, I'm just
and then I would fight through it, and he would like pretend like he didn't notice, and he'd be sitting there reading his paper, and I would worm my way up into his lap. And then I would just sit on his lap, and I just couldn't wait to be there. And he would keep reading his paper, and then I would start like tapping. I wanted his attention.
Yeah.
And he loved the game of, pretending like he wasn't paying attention to me when there was this, it was a very powerful and intimate moment between my dad and I. And he would also come down to my room at night before I'd go to sleep when I was a child, and he would draw pictures on my back and make me guess them and help me fall asleep. Like, that's the image of the Father that Jesus gives us, actually, is that kind of playful, and it isn't to say that there weren't moments when he had to discipline me and be stern with me because I was being a troublemaker and being problematic. But the home base of our relationship was a sense of connectivity.
Yeah.
I never thought of my relationship with my dad in performative terms. Like I had to perform a certain way in order to have his affection or his love.
Yeah.
I knew that there was a certain sense of responsibility that he was imposing on me, that he wanted me to be a mature and responsible person, respectful and things like that.
Yeah.
But that never dictated how I related to him. So I just think that people, when it comes to their Heavenly Father or it comes to relating to Jesus, I think we frame things in this performative way, and we see God in these out of a place of shame in terms of these kind of authoritarian images of him, and then we just miss the whole point.
I just, and this, I feel like so many people's experience of their own home life really deeply forms their ability or inability to draw close to God in that kind of a way, and I think a lot of people aren't even necessarily deeply conscious of that. I think it's just kind of how it's always been. They've learned in some way to accept that, and when something kind of digs into that or challenges that, they either retreat, or like busy themselves with some, they don't. It's hard to go into those spaces and admit, okay, yeah, maybe I haven't been approaching this with the right perspective, because going in and understanding what your wounds are and the things that need healed, or that can be really difficult. As you were sharing that story about your dad, I think about this a lot. Sometimes I think about what are the ways that I've kind of like screwed up my kids, like what have I done, even if I didn't intend to, where they're going to be, it's going to have a long-term effect on them. And this is more recent with our youngest daughter. At the end of dinner, I'll finish my dinner, and my alone time, like just time for me, is so limited, and dinner is kind of one of those times where there's a little, that bubble, that space around me that's, where I can just enjoy my meal, and while chaos is going on all over the place.
Their seats.
Yes.
Yeah.
And but she sits right to my right, and so she'll be eating and looking to see, like, is Dad done? Is Dad, like asking herself. And
funny.
as soon as Dad puts his fork down, she'll scoot her plate over. She'll move mine out of the way, scoot her plate over, get up out of her seat, and come over and sit on my lap, and that's how she finishes her dinner. And sometimes I'm like, I do this kind of like interior eye roller thing, because I'm like, just 2 more minutes. Like, just let me be Scott Lieb, like not anybody, not anything else, not have any responsibilities. But then I think to myself, I don't want her to think that that's, like that I don't have the time for her, that I don't have the space for her. And so, and I feel like that's, as human beings, we just, and as dads, as fathers, like, we're setting up all these conditions for our kids to like live out the rest of their lives, and I just feel like a lot of times people's approach to God, or the way that they feel comfortable or uncomfortable approaching God, is so formed by that, whether or not they realize it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I can relate to all of that. I mean, there's ways in which I'm not present. I think that's something I really struggle with is, am I attentive? Am I present? Am I paying attention? Am I checking in, connecting with my kids? But again, as a father, it's like I very much desire that. And as I was listening to you, I was thinking about the fact that, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately in terms of love. It's like, if I have what is the real nature of desiring another person? And I think that in the depths of our hearts, what's at the root of a desire for another is to be desired by the other. So when what we desire in desiring the other person is to be desired by them. And so when we seek to be attentive to them, we want them to pay attention to us. Because there's something, and we use this language today of being seen and being known and being heard. And I think that we all have a deep, as creatures, as dependent, as dependents on God, we want God to see us and look upon us and desire us. That's what we most want. But I think what happens when we live out of a place of shame, we desire God, but we don't believe that he desires us, that he's looking back. So we keep doing these little things that somehow is going to get his attention or make him pay attention to us. And that, I think, is the lie. Because the reality is the fact that you desire God is a revelation that God is desiring you. Because if he wasn't desiring you, the desire for him wouldn't be in your heart. We just stop and think about that for a minute. Relationality, it takes two to be in relationship. I'm going to use a weird analogy here, but like if we can see things, it's because things are created to be seen. So the fact that I'm seeing something with my eyes, I'm in relationship with something that's projecting its visibility into me.
Yeah.
So it's relational. Like
Sure.
It takes both things to be able to connect through sight or hearing. Okay? It's the same thing. If I'm desiring another person, what I desire in desiring the other is to be desired by them. And when the person desires me, it's magical. I mean, it's the sense of connectivity, the sense of belonging, the sense of mutual presence, of mutual affirmation, friendship, and we can use all these words, but that's what it is. And when that's simultaneous, it's mutual. It's like you enter into this beautiful place of connection and love and communion. That's what's happening there. So Jesus already desires us. That's why he's presented himself, he's projected himself into the world to be eaten, to be consumed in the Eucharist. And what he longs for is for us to desire him. And so he waits. I thirst. That's the same imagery. So often we're the ones that don't have the desire. So to pretend to be presentable to the Lord without the deep desire for him, I mean, like he can see right through that. That's just completely missing the point.
Yeah.
If I'm cultivating in myself a desire for him, or I'm experiencing a deep desire for him, a deep desire of connection and communion and witness and presence, and to touch God in a sense, it's already in a sense to be experiencing the reality that God is touching me. He is made himself present to me. I mean, he initiates. He's the initiator. That's what the groom does. He initiates. And he initiates the intimacy. So, again, I just want to say this one more time. When I have a desire to be connected to God, I have a desire for him, it's because he's already desired me. And that desire for me is present in me in some way, and it's drawing me to himself.
Yeah.
He's beckoning to us.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. If I have a desire for God, what I want is for God to desire me, to see me, to touch me, to connect with me, to be in communion with me. It's a mutual exchange.
Yeah.
That's the way we need to understand Holy Communion.
So Okay.
and marriage and friendship and all the rest.
Well, yeah, this is touching on a lot of things for me. And I don't know if this is theologically correct, but I'm going to throw this out there and you can, tear it apart or do whatever you want to with it. But it seems like for like the Old Testament, God was this, for lack of a better term, maybe like an ethereal God. Like he showed up in some sort of real ways to different people. The burning bush, but he wasn't like a being, and it seems like the Old Testament people oftentimes like it's easy to imagine that their struggle to remain faithful to God was because there was no person to person relation going on, right? Which to me, in my mind, you're looking at me like, where the hell are you going with this? But wait.
Yeah.
So God showing up, as God in Jesus, like as a person, was this perfect way for God, the creator of the universe, to be very relatable, to be, like one with, like in and amongst, like getting into it with people, like this very relational, incarnational, like flesh to flesh, face to face kind of a thing. And and it seems like that's because ultimately God created us as embodied people, right? Not just spirit people. So there was this intention of how important that is, like for us to experience him in the flesh, right? I'm assuming that's true.
No, I mean, no, you're right.
So,
but I feel like there's a song that somewhat contradicts what you're saying. Yeah.
what is
I think
it?
it's called "Same God."
Oh, okay. Yeah.
The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, the God of David, the God of Moses. Like, it's the same God.
It is the same
so
God.
I don't think it's that. I think that we can oftentimes have a false perception of the God of the Old Testament. And we have to understand that, like, it's a process to bring us to the place of intimacy that the incarnation allows.
Yeah.
And the Eucharist allows. God had to prepare a people who could even conceive of God in those terms. So, when you go back to paganism is the perfect example of a mercenary relationship with the gods. It's like, it's a complete bartering system. I'm going to bribe you to get this. It's completely transactional. It's completely commercial. That's what it is. And it's also therefore random and petulant and, like you don't know what you're getting. It might work, it might not work.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think that the transition to establishing a covenant, which is a familial relationship, that we are a family, and then establishing a covenant law, that is, I want you to know that I'm present to you because I'm going to tell you ahead of time that when you live in this way, this will be the result, and when you live in that way, this will be the result. Like, what other nation has a God who gives his people such a perfect law? That's what Scripture itself says of itself. And so there's a certain, and again, you can go back to when you're a parent of a young child, you kind of have to put some rules in place, some boundaries, right? But those boundaries are not supposed to counter the reality of intimacy. They're actually supposed to create the conditions for the possibility of intimacy. Just like with your daughter, like, she knows dad needs space, but she also knows that she needs dad's space. And so when she knows it's time, she's there. So I think that as we, God is preparing us for the level of intimacy and connection that he wants. And so this idea that God doesn't want to be touched, he doesn't want to be approached, he doesn't, we have to be, he's standoffish, he's guarded.
Right.
It's like, that's not true reverence.
Right.
Reverence understands that there's a there's an appropriate level of affection and attentiveness and focus on the other that God's love deserves as the fitting response. And so, yeah, there are some practices we have that are meant to help us get there.
Yeah.
But it's like once you're there, like throw off the training wheels and ride the bicycle. It's like be there in the moment with the Lord and be present to Him. I mean, I always feel bad at Mass, like when I go and receive communion and my mind wanders, or I get distracted with looking at people queuing up, whatever. And I think the Lord has just given Himself to me in this profound way, and I can't even keep my attention on Him. I always say I have spiritual ADHD, I just I can't. So, but I have to remember, I've just received Jesus, and Jesus deserves all of my affection and all of my attention.
Yeah.
Because He wants to enjoy this moment, because He's seeing me, He's desiring me, He's affirming me.
Yeah.
And He just wants that reciprocated. Like, that's all He wants. He wants love. Mm-hmm. And so often we replace that love for these external forms of piety that are practiced within a more performative and transactional mindset. And I think, talk about an eye roll. I think God rolls His eyes and says, when are you going to understand what I want?
Okay. So maybe we can, this can be the last thing that we can talk about, but going back to this notion that God desires us, and that's what kind of fuels our desire for God. And, this desire, I think, can have so many different connotations, meanings. When you use that word, that can mean a bunch of different things to a bunch of different people. And I want to, if you're okay with this, I want to specifically talk about this idea of desire, intimacy with Jesus in the context of men, right? And we probably talked about this in previous episodes, but I think that it can be really difficult to, as guys, we're probably, I don't know if we're touch starved, right? But I feel like a lot of times our touch falls into two categories, right? It's either sexual, like intimate touch, or it's sports, like smacking guys on the butt or chest bumping or whatever it is. Like we have
it's got to be macho.
We've got
cool.
these very, very specific forms of touch, that are considered appropriate or within a certain context. So but I would say that we have the idea of a touching God, a God who wants to touch us, or a desire to touch our God can be like a really scary kind of thing for guys. I don't know if you wanted to kind of talk about that or.
Well, sure. I guess the first thing that is occurring to me is that we can oftentimes, we live in an overly masculine machismo type of male culture here in the United States, where everything is so broified, and and it's exaggerated, and I think that that's just an outward expression of insecurity. What we really desire is connection, and there's different ways to feel connected, but we're afraid to sort of be vulnerable or to be transparent to that fact that this is actually what we want. And it's easy to get it in an erotic sexual way, and that's just the other side of the the excessive machismo, is that you've got to have this wild and crazy sex. My wife and I were commenting, we watch different TV shows, and it's just always amazing to me. It's like the way sex happens, not that we watch big sex scenes, that's not my point, but it's this is 13 and 14 ratings, so they're not showing a whole lot, but it's always this it's never this tender, gentle, it's always this
power kind of
ravaged, kind of thing. And it's like, who does that in real life? Like, I don't know, maybe there are people that do. But the point is to me, it seems like an expression of this exaggerated machismo and this exaggerated kind of femininity that's like overpowered by this male prowess, she finally gives in, and it's like, I don't know, all of that messes us up and messes with us and gets into our heads. So that's the first thing I think of is that it actually conditions us to be very averse and very uncomfortable with things that are tender and gentle, and slow moving and delicate, because that seems effeminate and gay, or that kind of a thing. So, but I think it's all a lie because, first of all, there's other cultures that are also manly and, fathers and sons kiss on the lips and, But I think given that, I think it's easier in more, within the context of machismo, it's easier to imagine intimacy in the father-son relationship, child to parent for guys than it is the spousal, because obviously, trying to imagine yourself as the spouse, But I also think too, another way to think about it is, you can have like a connection with a kind of father figure in your life if you don't have the father in your life that you need. So I don't know why this scene popped into my head, but I'm thinking all of a sudden this Top Gun scene, at the end of the movie where, Maverick is all like broken up over the loss, of Goose and all that. And he's talking to the commanding officer.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name.
Tom Skerritt.
Yeah, there's just that connection of the wise kind of father figure who's helping him pull his life back together again and pull himself together again. I think we can relate to Jesus in those terms, like a commander in chief who's also very attentive to our needs as a son in need of a father figure. And I think that that's an easier way where that figure can appeal to our more childlike side and our more vulnerable side. So I think that's, from a spiritual standpoint, it's very difficult for us. You have to be a pretty spiritually mature person, I think, to be able to step into the spousal meaning of the spiritual life, where I see myself as the bride of Christ, which the church is collectively. As a guy, that's just hard. And I don't think it's necessary to go there. I think what's necessary is this idea of being a child of God that's desired by our Heavenly Father. And we have a brother in Christ that is looking out for us, who's stepping into our space, who wants to, throw his arm around us and pull us in, and tell us it's going to be okay, and I'm here, and I care about you, and I desire you. I want to, I just think sometimes we're so afraid of God that we just don't allow ourselves to do that. So again, we're going to put ourselves together and make ourselves all ready and presentable. And it's to me, that's the lie of the devil. It's not,
Well, I think it seems
not
like
our Father.
Yeah. I don't know. For me, I think a lot of it boils down to, especially as men, we generally have this desire to control a situation, and I don't know what all that is about, if it's power, if it's like maintaining power. But I feel like the vulnerability thing risks control, like I don't see how you can be both vulnerable and completely in control at the same time. Like vulnerability, I feel like gives up a little bit of the control. Not completely. I'm not talking like where you just allow yourself to be manipulated and used, but I'm just saying there's a little bit of the letting go or controlling a situation whenever, because you don't know when you're truly vulnerable. You're just kind of putting yourself out there without necessarily knowing or having the ability to determine the outcomes of somebody's reaction, things like that. So there's that. I feel like weakness, entering into. I mean, I even think like on a level with my spouse, you know, true vulnerability exposes your weaknesses. Like I always joke that anybody else outside of my marriage can say anything to me, and I generally could not give a crap less what they say. I mean, I don't want to sound completely like I don't care what
Callous.
people say, but it doesn't hurt my feelings, right? But Becky has the ability to crush me, like with anything that she says, and
Well, that's because you love her.
well,
And
right, but
it is precisely because you are intimate.
yeah,
That's why.
right.
I mean, we would say that about. I mean, the ones that hurt us the most are the ones with whom we feel the most connection. That's obvious.
Right.
So
But I think as guys a lot of times we avoid that in a lot of our relationships,
yeah,
like
we do. And I mean, I don't. I think there's a certain fittingness. I mean, boundaries are important. You're not gonna enter into the same level of intimacy with everybody, or
well, right.
vulnerability. I
Yeah,
mean,
for sure.
there's like there's certain people that are deserving and worthy of that kind of trust, and some people are not, and therefore we're going to be more guarded or more, we're going to protect ourselves. That's human nature, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we shouldn't be that way with God. That's the reality.
Right.
Like if there's anyone that we should be able to be completely vulnerable and trusting of, it's him. And therefore, back to where we started here, like as we approach him to receive him, we have to think about it in terms of the fact that the Lord is desiring us and desiring to be one with us and to be in communion with us. And he wants us to get connected with that desire in ourselves, that what we most desire and most long for is to be known and seen and loved by the one who created us. That's what we want. And when we find that connection, all is well. I mean, like life is so much easier, and we can be so much more secure and grounded in our life, and we know how to negotiate and navigate the complexity of human relationships because we're anchored, in
Yeah.
him,
Yeah.
and that's whether that's our spouse or whether that's our friends or coworkers or whoever it is. But there's always going to be varying degrees of trust and communion, depending upon whether or not there's mutual vulnerability and
Yeah.
some level of the intimacy of friendship with another person, and that's normal. But what's tragic is when we reduce God to the most unapproachable of all beings,
Mm.
and when he's the most.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's before we kind of like close this out. Sometimes in whether we're leading retreats or whatever, and Emily will lead a imaginative exercise, right? Um, that can be sometimes she'll set it up where Jesus is like asking, to reach out and kind of hold his hands, like. And it's funny, like even now I mean, the first time I think that she ever sort of like let us into that space, yeah, if I'm being totally honest, I'm like, that's kind of weird. Like,
Yeah.
because it's not part of my It's not normally what I do in my friendships with guys like you and I.
We don't hold hands.
We don't hold hands
Yeah,
during our
we don't.
podcast.
Yeah, we don't hold hands.
But but the more I thought about it, I did have this question kept coming up to me. It's like, Jesus would never, I mean, I know this deep in my heart. Jesus would never manipulate or, try to take advantage of me in any way. And I think ultimately, deep down, that my fear is being manipulated or and I had to kind of like dig into that to understand my own, like, what ultimately was my hesitation to that. Yeah, part of it was that's just not my normal go-to physical expression of love and care and tenderness with a guy or a friend, a guy friend. But I had to ask myself, but this is Jesus. Like, what ultimately is that about? And it was really, it's good. It's actually made me and forced me to explore those areas of my life, especially within my relationship with Jesus, about what is like, what does it mean to be touched by Jesus? What does it mean to touch Jesus? Like, and all in very healthy kind of like expressions. But as a guy, I have to go through that process of like really, really understanding all the barriers to that within myself.
Yeah. Well, again, I think a lot of this is cultural. I mean, if you were
For sure.
like when you're, I know for me, I mean, I can feel somewhat the same way, although maybe I don't struggle with it quite like you're describing, but like if the Blessed Mother, if you're visualizing yourself from the Blessed Mother and she wants to take your hands, like as a guy, you're not going to have any problem with
Yeah,
that
right.
because and I would say that goes back to the fact that we too closely identify the intimate and the sense of touch with the erotic.
Mm-hmm.
And because we're over sexualized as a culture and we're conditioned to think that touch means sexual, some kind of arousing type of thing. And it's like, well, that, of course, I should feel uncomfortable with that if I'm, a properly grounded man, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But what we have to do is get past that's actually not what Jesus well, that's not what's going on. Like we have to remove that filter and realize that the sense, and that's why I think, honestly, that's why Jesus, let's be honest, like this is why he presents himself to us as the bridegroom in the form of food. Because eating is also another kind of an intimate, both in terms of table fellowship, but also just in terms of food passing into yourself. Eating and consuming the Lord actually is a very intimate image, but it's not sexual. Or it's easier to not sexualize it. It's like because it attends to a basic necessity of life and survival and I have to eat to live and I don't. That's 99.9999999% of the time, eating is not a sexual experience. People can make food a sexual experience.
Right.
We know, but that's not generally how we eat. And so the Lord he's seeking this kind of connection and intimacy with us in and through the communion of table fellowship. And that's, of course, horizontally with each other as brothers and sisters at the family table, but more fundamentally, it is in terms of the vertical dimension of our relationship with God. God enters into us through being consumed by us, and we, of course, then are assimilated into Him by what it is. We become the thing we eat, so to speak.
Right.
And again, it's meant to be a sense of connectivity to God. God wants to be in this intimate relationship with us, and this is how He's chosen to mediate, first through the incarnation, and then through the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, and then through the regular communion of love that we experience through, Holy Communion.
Mm.
So good place to end, I think. But
Yeah.
it's like, I think that, are we worthy to touch Jesus? Worthiness is not really what's at stake here. It's we are loved, and do we allow ourselves to be loved, and do we want to return that love in exchange? Do we want to love God for his own sake and seek and desire him just as he has sought and desired us? And I think that's the true spirit of what we're trying to get at by reverence.
Yeah.
So anyhow, hopefully this episode was helpful to you. It's as we were talking about it, it kind of made me realize that this is more complicated than it might seem on the surface. Back to the story of, am I a bride? And as a bride, can I touch my spouse? And I think that the way to understand this is really in the context of either friendship and connectivity, or in terms of kind of the parent-child relationship, where God desires to, pull us up onto his lap and hold us and keep us close to himself. So hopefully this was helpful to you, and perhaps your Holy Communions will be more meaningful to you.
The Wise Guys Podcast is a production of Preambula Group, a Catholic ministry dedicated to helping you thrive in the heart of Jesus. Visit us on the web at preambula.org and follow us on social media.